Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto the dusty floors of an ancient Syrian warehouse where the air smells like cracked earth, old wood, and something faintly herbal, like crushed olive leaves and last week's market day. You reach out, brushing your fingers over the cool, grainy surface of a clay jar. It's big, hip height, and its bulging belly is faintly marked with symbols. Nothing flashy, just a few shallow scratches near the lip, a thumbprint pushed into wet clay before it dried, and a faded swipe of red pigment. Still, these quiet details tell you more than any label on your shampoo bottle back home. Because here, this isn't just a jar. It's a message. It's history, politics, economy, and ego, all baked into one slightly chipped container of olive oil. And you probably won't survive this warehouse tour if you try to lift one. Ancient jars weren't playing around. They could hold 60 liters or more. That's like lifting your roommate if your roommate were a barrel-shaped ceramic filled with expensive fat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing under an open-beamed ceiling, the kind that lets just enough filtered light pour in through cracks. The room is filled with olive jars, or amphora if you're feeling scholarly, and each one seems to whisper, "Hey, look closer." At first glance, they're identical, dull, brownish red, smoothed by time. But the more you squint, the more you notice. Tiny scratches that look like someone carved a fish, a swirl, a name, maybe. On one, there's a small animal paw pressed into the side. A cat? A bad day for clay? Historians still argue whether these markings were standardized codes, personal signatures, or just the potter's lunch companion walking across his workbench. Here's the thing. Ancient Syria was one of those crucial crossroady places, north of Egypt, east of the Mediterranean, a major stretch of land that hosted empires like house guests who never left. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and eventually Romans all passed through. And they all wanted one thing: control over trade. Not just spice or silk or gold, but this humble, golden green liquid, olive oil. You trail your fingers along a jar's ridge, feeling the grit catch under your nails. This one has a pressed seal at the neck, kind of like someone took their signet ring and mashed it into the clay while it was still soft. That seal might belong to a merchant, a city official, or a warehouse supervisor. It told everyone who touched this jar later where it came from and whether it was trustworthy. Imagine if your grocery store apples had a wax seal from your mayor. That's the level we're talking about here. Olive oil wasn't just for salads. In ancient Syria, it was cooking fat, lamp fuel, soap base, medicine, and religious offering. You could clean a wound with it or light your shrine. No wonder the stuff needed careful tracking. A mislabeled jar could throw off a sacred ceremony, ruin a dinner, or make a merchant very, very angry. You bend low near one amphora with deep, blocky lettering etched just under the rim. It reads something like, El Hadar, pure, sun-pressed, year 3. You don't know who El Hadar was, but he sounds like the guy who triple checks his to-do list and alphabetizes his receipts. Let's be honest, this wasn't sexy work. Nobody bragged at the bar about their olive jar labeling prowess. But these labels, whether painted symbols, wax seals, or etched lines, were the glue that held together a chaotic, overlapping network of farmers, traders, priests, and officials. You try to imagine that farmer wiping sweat from his face with an oil-stained cloth, loading up his donkey with amphorae that had just enough info scratched into them to make sure the right buyer got the right batch. And sometimes they added jokes. No, really. Archaeologists have found pots with doodles or little inscriptions that hint at sarcasm. One sherd from the region has a line that roughly translates to, "Best oil unless you're a liar." Another might say, "Stolen? Not my problem." Fringe researchers argue whether these were marketing gimmicks or Potter gripes, but come on, ancient sarcasm is eternal. As you step deeper into the warehouse, the jars feel less like containers and more like characters. Some are sleek and tall, others short and stubby. A few have odd bulges or off-kilter handles. One has a faint scent still clinging to its mouth, a mix of wood smoke, thyme, and sun-warmed olives. You press your nose closer, wondering how many meals this oil had flavored, how many prayers it lit in a flickering temple flame. A loud clatter echoes down the corridor. You flinch, just a pigeon knocking over a loose shard. But it reminds you, all this care, all these labels, could be wiped away in seconds. A war, a fire, a careless drop. And then, all we're left with are guesses. Educated, well-funded guesses, sure. But still. Historians dig through these jars today like detectives. They use fancy chemical tests to figure out what was inside, where the clay came from, whether a certain batch had been cut with cheaper oils. But the markings? Those are still the best clues. Sometimes they match a tax record in another city, or a merchant's ledger half-rotted under a collapsed floor. And sometimes the marks just don't make sense. A swirl here, a star there, a chicken foot. Maybe the ancient Syrians knew. Maybe they didn't. Historians still argue whether these random marks had consistent meanings or were just early forms of doodle-based time-killing. You stretch your arms above your head, hearing the creak of your own spine echo against the walls. One jar near the exit has a chipped lid, the seal broken long ago. You peek inside. It's empty, but a faint film glistens at the bottom like forgotten honey. It reminds you that this wasn't just some museum exhibit. It was someone's livelihood, someone's gamble, someone's perfectly labeled jar. And as you walk out into the sun, brushing a streak of clay off your pants, you start to realize the ancient world wasn't built on marble statues or bronze swords. It was built on details, on fingerprints in soft clay, on labels that said, "This matters." You step outside the dim warehouse and into the hot Syrian sun. It hits you like a wall, dry, direct, and aggressive, like a desert dog sniffing your pockets for shade. The brightness makes your eyes water as you follow a dirt path winding through rows of olive trees that stretch toward the horizon. Their silvery green leaves shimmer in the heat, and the faint rustle of branches gives the air a rhythm, like the old world breathing in and out. Ahead, a man in a loose tunic, sun-darkened skin, cracked hands, and a skeptical look like he's seen too many curious strangers, beckons you toward a press site. "Come," he says, with a voice that sounds like it's been sanded by wind and arguments. You want to understand the jars, you start with the oil. You follow him into a shallow stone courtyard, where several people are stomping olives barefoot in a shallow basin. The smell hits first, rich and musky, somewhere between freshly cut grass and oily tapenade. It clings to your nostrils. This isn't your hipster olive oil from a boutique in Brooklyn. This is the original stuff, the kind that was currency, medicine, and miracle in one gloppy pour. You watch as the stomped olive paste is scooped into woven baskets, stacked and pressed under thick wooden beams, tightened with hand-carved screws. Slowly, dark green-gold oil drips into a clay basin. Every drop looks precious, almost sacred. And in this world, it was. Olive oil wasn't just part of ancient Syrian life. It was ancient Syrian life. You lean on a sun-warmed stone wall while your guide gestures broadly. Everything needed it. Everything traded it. Without oil, nothing works. Which might sound dramatic until you realize that it lit lamps, fed families, anointed kings, and even cleaned bodies. Yes, people bathed with oil. Picture that next time you're covered in gym sweat. Just a clay jug and a scraping knife, and boom, spa day, Bronze Age style. You glance back at the amphorae resting in the shade. It makes sense now, why they were so carefully labeled. This wasn't just about contents. It was about quality, purpose, audience. Oil for the temple? Marked for purity. Oil for the kitchens of nobles? Labeled by region. Oil for the army's feet and wounds? Packaged in bulk with all the delicacy of a warehouse clearance sale. Historians still argue whether the labels followed a strict bureaucratic code or were more casual, a kind of merchant shorthand. But one thing's clear. Some labels were deeply specific. One unearthed jar fragment from northern Syria reads something like, "From the orchard of Anatu, son of Kudshu, pressed on the third moon after planting, stored in shaded clay, for temple use only." It's basically a resume for olives. You walk with the farmer through his grove, the squish of fallen fruit underfoot. He pauses beneath a particularly gnarled tree and gestures up. These, good for burning. Those, good for eating. These... He taps a branch loaded with small, oily berries. Are the money. It's not just the tree that matters. It's the timing, the soil, the press, even the moon cycle. No two batches are identical. That's why those little scratches on the jar carry weight. They're not decoration. They're declaration. You sip from a ceramic cup handed to you, a sample of the freshly pressed oil. It's grassy, bitter, almost spicy. The farmer grins as you blink at the intensity. "Not for salad," he says with a laugh. "For gods." Back in town, the scent of oil lingers in the streets. You pass a vendor rubbing oil onto leather sandals, another pouring it into clay lamps shaped like little fish, a young girl massaging it into her scalp while her grandmother chants. It's everywhere, seeping into the bricks of civilization. At the market's edge, you spot a scribe perched on a stool, carefully copying a list onto a wax tablet. It's an inventory of jars, each marked with a symbol and a short phrase. They keep track, someone murmurs beside you. You label wrong, you get fined. You sell fake oil, you get worse. One merchant once wrote that temple guards sniffed every shipment for quality. Imagine trying to sneak through with subpar olives, only to get caught by a nose trained better than a bloodhound's. A fringe theory you overheard earlier returns to your mind. Some historians believe oil was once used as a social status marker, like designer handbags or limited edition sneakers. That certain markings on jars weren't about function, but fashion. This oil comes from Mount X, aged under starlight, stirred by virgins. That kind of thing. Not everyone agrees, but let's be honest. Humans have always loved a bit of pretentious flair. And then there's the theft. You duck into a low archway where confiscated goods are stored. A warehouse of unlabeled jars, each one seized for suspicious markings, or none at all. You imagine being a poor trader who forgot to add one scratch, one seal, and suddenly your cargo is contraband. It's like losing your passport on the way to customs. Oil ran empires, your guide mutters. And it ruined people too. You believe it. Every time your eyes land on another amphora, you don't just see clay. You see a record, a contract, a whisper from someone who needed this oil to arrive safely, be trusted, and be used correctly. That label? It's their only voice. You wipe sweat from your brow. A crow caws overhead. Somewhere, a jar seal pops open with a gentle plunk. The olive oil inside glistens in the light. And you think, yeah, maybe it was ancient gold, just messier. You duck beneath an awning as the sun creeps higher, and a fresh breeze wafts up from the riverbank, hot but grateful. Ahead, a man is crouched over a freshly fired amphora, its reddish-brown surface still radiating heat. He's using a thin bone tool to scratch a series of symbols into the soft clay. Fast, confident, no hesitation. You watch from a polite distance. Every mark he makes feels final, like a spell being cast. He glances up. "Don't blink," he mutters. One wrong line and a priest eats lamp oil instead of anointing oil. That's how cities fall. You blink anyway. This, apparently, is the ancient barcode hustle, a quiet system of scratches, stamps, symbols, and seals that tried to impose order on a world where donkeys could overturn shipments and desert thieves made off with your quarterly profits. Each amphora was a message, a declaration, a gamble. You kneel beside him, the dust warm under your knees. The potter flicks a glance at the amphora's shoulder, where the clay is thicker. "That's where the identity goes," he says. "Press mark, owner mark, region maybe, contents if you've got space." He chuckles, tapping the rim. "And if you don't, well, hope the inspector's in a good mood." Not every jar had words. In fact, many didn't. Illiteracy was common, even among traders. Instead, they used sigils, simple geometric marks, animals, plants, stars. Some cities had trademarked symbols. a palm tree for Damascus, a crescent for Mari, a stylized eye for regions near Ugarit. One pot from the Euphrates Valley features what looks suspiciously like a tiny stick man doing a cartwheel, but historians still argue whether that was a regional brand or just an unusually energetic potter. The clay under your fingers is rough but soft, damp enough to accept a mark but dry enough to hold it. You imagine the potter working late, candle stub flickering, scratching those lines while his wife snores and his son chases beetles under the table. Maybe he copied his marks from a master list. Maybe he invented them. No one's quite sure how consistent these systems were. Historians still argue whether there was a shared labeling standard across regions or whether every trader made up his own version like some elaborate inside joke. You glance at a jar labeled with a set of repeating triangles. The potter nods. Means it's for temple use. Triangle for fire. 3 for the Trinity of Gods. Don't mix that with cooking oil unless you want very holy pancakes. You chuckle, quietly. The amphora beside it has a stylized wave scratched on its base. That one? He says. Export oil. From the coast. Went to Egypt last month. Ship didn't come back. Sharks, maybe. The more you look, the more complex the system seems. Some jars have vertical lines stacked along the neck, likely a volume measurement. Others are marked with letters from multiple languages, Syriac script on one side, Greek on the other. A few even bear numerals, year markers perhaps, or production batch codes. You feel like you're decoding the Rosetta Stone in a farmer's shed. Sometimes we used colors, the potter adds, dipping a finger into a dish of ochre paint. Red for royal, black for household, yellow for spoiled. Don't ask why we kept those. He shrugs. No one likes to throw away a good jar. You look up as a younger assistant joins him, carrying a cracked amphora with a faint mark, barely visible. The potter winces. Fool dropped the seal stamp in the river. Now we scratch by hand. Less elegant, more prone to lies. That's where the hustle comes in. You pass a cluster of traders bickering at the edge of the market square. One waves a jar, shouting, "This says it's mountain pressed." Another retorts, "That mark's upside down. It's coastal runoff, you liar." A nearby inspector steps in, gently cracking a clay seal and sniffing the rim of the jar like it's a suspicious cantaloupe. He frowns. This is cooking grade, not for sale at temple rates. There's a fine line between clever labeling and criminal fraud. Mislabel your product, and you could lose a sale. Get caught deliberately forging a stamp? That's another story. One Babylonian tablet mentions a trader exiled for scratching off another man's seal and replacing it with his own. Petty theft, sure, but in a world where trust was baked into the pot, you were messing with the entire system. You trail behind a scribe who catalogs every jar in a public warehouse. He carries a wooden stylus, dipped in black ink, and walks the rows like a museum curator. He reads each label aloud, sometimes nodding, sometimes sighing. Wrong year, wrong region, missing press mark. We're going to need another scroll. Still, not every error was malicious. Sometimes people just got tired, or lazy, or they'd been drinking. You spot a jar with 2 overlapping marks. Clearly, someone started one symbol and changed their mind halfway through. A fringe theory among archaeologists suggests some markings were added after firing, meaning traders might have scratched them in on the road, in a hurry, with no potter supervision. Just you, your donkey, and a sharp rock. In that context, the ancient label isn't just about control, it's about hope. Hope that someone will understand your message, that your oil won't get dumped, misused, or forgotten in a corner of some palace pantry. You sit on a stone step as the potter sets aside another finished jar, its surface marked with care. "It's all a story," he says, wiping sweat from his brow. "Every jar tells one. You just have to listen." And as the wind picks up dust across the yard, you think maybe he's right. These aren't just labels. They're whispered promises across time. One scratch at a time, the wind shifts, and with it comes the scent of cumin and sweat, trader smells. You're now at the outskirts of a dusty way station, where merchants from all directions converge. There's shouting, gesturing, sweating, and more shouting, all against the backdrop of camels groaning like disgruntled bureaucrats. You're drawn toward a checkpoint, a low stone platform surrounded by bored-looking guards and very serious-looking jars. The atmosphere buzzes with quiet tension. It's not just trade. It's regulation. And these soldiers aren't here for show. They're posted to stop one of the great invisible threats of ancient commerce: bad oil. Yes, you heard that right. One rancid batch of olive oil, and you've got a disaster. Imagine a sacred temple ceremony ruined by spoiled oil that burns with a foul stench instead of a sweet glow. Or a visiting dignitary served meat fried in old grease. Or worse, soldiers rubbing it into wounds and developing infections. Ancient Syrians took their oil seriously, and if you tried to sneak dodgy stock across the border, you were asking for a world of clay-sealed trouble. You step closer to the checkpoint just as a merchant unloads 2 amphorae. One is marked with an elaborate floral swirl, the other with a basic triangle. A guard squints at the markings, runs his fingers along the clay lip, then gives a gruff nod. "Mountain batch, late press, use by the new moon." He taps the side of the triangle-marked jar. "This one's light grade, cooking only." He pops open the seal with a sharp flick of a bronze knife and sniffs. You watch his eyes narrow. Then he dips in a twig, lights it. The oil flares, sputters. "Burns dirty," he mutters. "Trash this." The merchant protests, arms flailing, voice cracking. But the verdict stands. One unlabeled detail, one misfire, and your profits go up in actual smoke. You'd think people would just fake better markings, right? And some did. But here's the catch. If you got caught faking a label, like slapping a temple seal on substandard kitchen oil, you weren't just fined. You could lose trade rights, storage access, even citizenship in some cases. There's a clay tablet from Emar that mentions a merchant stripped of his name rights for fraudulently labeling oil as sun-pressed from royal groves. He actually bought it from a swamp-side farm with goats in the trees. True story, or close enough for ancient bureaucracy. And this is where it gets juicier. There are scattered mentions of oil-related skirmishes. That's right. Historians still argue whether certain regional flare-ups between trade towns were sparked not over territory, but over accusations of spoiled oil being passed as premium. One particularly dramatic episode, carved into a basalt stele and half eroded, seems to describe a local governor in Katna declaring economic vengeance on a neighboring city for the betrayal of the jar. Honestly, that sounds like a band name. But here, it's serious. You crouch beside a pile of confiscated amphorae, cracked, seeping, some still reeking faintly of vinegar. Each was likely rejected for a reason. Seal broken, content unclear, markings inconsistent. The guards give you a look that says, "Don't touch those, you don't." Nearby, a young assistant pours good oil from a cleared shipment into small lamp jars, prepping samples for a palace steward. He works quickly but carefully, his eyes flicking to each jar's shoulder where the symbol confirms what type of oil he's pouring. He tells you one jar came from a press near Aleppo, marked with a distinctive clover-shaped seal only used in that region. "Temple grade," he says with pride. "Approved last week." He lights a sample. The flame is clean, steady, with a pale gold glow. You nod like you understand fire now. But not everything is so straightforward. There are whispers here of merchants using camouflage marks, intentional decoys, like slapping a cracked, generic amphora over a sealed, pristine jar to smuggle it past nosy guards, or scratching over old marks with new ones in hopes no one notices. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. There's a broken tablet from Ebla referencing a group of traders fined for double labeling, a term we'd call rebranding today, though ancient inspectors weren't nearly as forgiving. You stroll past a scribe updating an inventory tablet, stylus tapping as he mutters aloud, 3 jars, late press, 2 spoiled, 1 unclear origin, reject." He doesn't even glance up. You suddenly appreciate the modern barcode scanner way more than you thought possible. A fringe theory comes up from a nearby translator. He swears that certain border towns invented their own label dialects to confuse or discourage outsiders. Symbology drift, he calls it. A triangle in the west might mean temple use, while in the south it meant nothing but not for drinking. Whether this was clever protectionism or just messy miscommunication, historians still argue whether those differences were intentional trade strategies or just regional chaos baked into the clay. You pass a final row of jars being resealed after inspection. Each has a fresh stamp in wax or clay, a local symbol certifying that this oil passed the sniff test. Literally. Some seals are pressed with carved stones, others with rings, some even with carved fingernails if you're going DIY. Once sealed, it's law. You break a certified seal without cause, and you could be fined, banned, or have your goods seized. One young merchant, watching nervously, tells you his entire season's worth of profit hinges on those symbols being read correctly. "The jar carries my name," he says quietly, tapping the curved neck of his amphora. "If it lies, I disappear." You pause, tracing the edge of a wax seal still warm from the sun. It's a small detail in a big, dusty world, but somehow, it's everything. The checkpoint fades behind you as you walk away, but you can still hear the crack of a jar being opened, the sharp intake of breath, the sniff, the verdict. In ancient Syria, labels weren't decoration. They were defense. And if warlords hated one thing more than spoiled oil, it was being tricked by bad clay. The road bends away from the checkpoint, and soon you're winding through a quieter part of the city, if such a thing exists in ancient Syria. The clamor of trade gives way to the murmurs of record keepers, scribes, and a very particular kind of person, the bureaucrat. These aren't the warriors, or the priests, or even the merchants. No, these are the people who make the world tick in the most pencil-pushing, form-stamping way possible. You find yourself inside a low-slung administrative building, a treasury office or municipal depot of some kind. It smells like dust, ink, beeswax, and faint panic. The kind of place where no one has slept in months and someone's always muttering about column 5 not matching the official seal log. You spot a table sagging under the weight of clay tablets, scrolls, styluses, and wax-sealed jar fragments. A clerk with ink-stained fingers is hunched over, comparing the mark on a broken amphora neck to a symbol carved into a master tablet. "This one doesn't match," he mutters, scratching his beard. "Same merchant, different year, and the volume doesn't align. Rejected." You lean in closer and realize this is how ancient Syrians really kept control of their olive oil empires. It wasn't just jars and seals, it was records, paperwork, well, papyrus work, clay work, bureaucracy so dense it could stop a horse in its tracks. Every shipment was logged, every amphora seal referenced, every merchant's output cross-checked against land allotments and tax filings. One official flips through a stack of palm fiber scrolls, lips moving silently as he counts. 11 jars declared, 9 received, 1 broken, 1 unsealed, shortfall charged to family name. That last part is key. If you messed up a shipment, it wasn't just you in trouble. Your family name bore the brunt. Whole lineages could be blacklisted over a bad batch of lamp oil. Olive oil runs smoother when people fear paperwork, the official says flatly, not even looking up from his counting. You trail behind him into a vaulted back room, darker, cooler. Shelves line the walls, each packed with small amphora shards, each one labeled and tied with string. Think of it like an ancient forensic lab. One scribe holds up a piece with visible soot stains. "Smuggled through a burned checkpoint," he says. "See? This corner symbol? It's a fake." He tosses it into a discard basket with a practiced flick. "We'll charge the merchant's uncle. He vouched for it." At a workbench, another clerk is attempting to reassemble a broken amphora based solely on its seal pattern and clay composition. "It's from the eastern hills," he explains. "Coarse texture, dark slip, square seal impression. Probably 2 seasons old." You ask how he knows. "The seal's worn," he shrugs. "Also," he taps the inside, "the scent's turned. Last use was non-edible." He doesn't even flinch as he says this. It's like watching a sommelier of ancient storage containers. Historians still argue whether this level of bureaucracy existed outside royal or temple control. Was it centralized or decentralized? Were local scribes empowered to make these calls, or were they simply data gatherers for some master archive in the capital? The debate continues, but judging from the stress on these clerks' faces, someone was keeping score. You spot a shelf labeled Disputed Origins. It's a sad little graveyard of jars whose symbols either contradict known records or are so vague they defy classification. One just has a spiral and a dot. Another features what looks like a tree, or maybe a trident, or possibly a goat with very ambitious ears. Forgery? You ask. The clerk shrugs. Could be. Could be a new mark from a region we haven't cataloged yet. Then, a little quieter. Could be someone messing with us. Because here's the thing. Humans are endlessly clever and endlessly messy. For every careful, law-abiding merchant, there was another trying to slip something by. Double-stamped seals, hidden chambers in amphorae, even fake mold applied to jars to make them look aged and reputable. Fringe researchers love this stuff. One even claimed to have found evidence of a gang in Palmyra who specialized in altering jar seals using a heat and scratch method, allowing them to erase and replace markings without leaving obvious damage. Whether this is true? Well, historians still argue whether that was an organized ring or just one really bored potter with a grudge. Back in the records room, a young scribe brings over a tablet and whispers to the older clerk. This batch from the northern provinces doesn't match last year's volume records. The older man grunts. Could be a false report. Could be a drought. Check with the temple logs. You follow him as he opens a thick scroll kept in a locked cedar chest. Temple logs are stricter. The gods don't tolerate bad math. You ask how often jars are rejected. He leans back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. Daily, weekly, constantly. Most of the time it's honest error. Wrong symbol, forgot to seal, someone used the wrong batch ink. He lowers his voice. But sometimes it's deliberate. And when it's deliberate, he pauses, taps a worn amphora shard. Well, then it's politics. You linger as a runner bursts in with a new shipment, 12 jars, straight from a southern grove. The clerks descend like hawks. One checks the seals, another the inscriptions. A third uses a copper probe to test the oil. Too light, she says, likely watered down. A fine is calculated before the merchant even finishes sweating. By now, it's clear. Labeling wasn't just a potter's chore. It was the entry ticket into a sprawling, obsessive, papyrus-choked ecosystem. You look around at the endless scrolls, the clatter of styluses, the sighs of men haunted by inconsistent triangle shapes. Somewhere, a scribe sneezes, and 3 records are updated. And you think, this is how order was maintained. Not with swords, but with seals. Not with armies, but with acronyms and amphora audits. A whole world held together by dusty fingers and the fear of mislabeling. You step back out into the light, but it's different now. Your eyes have adjusted, and so has your sense of what's really going on with these jars. The sun blazes overhead, but you follow the shade of a linen canopy stretched over a row of merchant stalls. There, tucked between a spice dealer and a bored sandal seller, you see something that immediately makes your tired brain perk up. The inspection tent. It's a modest space, nothing flashy, just a series of wooden tables, a few clay jars resting at odd angles, and a group of men with the kind of permanent frown lines that suggest they don't trust anything. This is where the sniffing happens, the ceiling, the suspicious side eyes. You duck under the canopy just as a trader uncorks a jar, and, whoa, that's ripe. You pretend not to react as a stern inspector leans in, eyes closed, and takes a long, slow sniff. He winces. "Gone cloudy," he mutters. "Too old for fire, not safe for skin." He dips a strip of linen into the oil, rubs it on a patch of his forearm, then waits. Apparently, even texture and skin absorption are part of the test. "This batch is no good. Label says, for temple use." That's a lie. The merchant stammers something about humidity. The inspector just gives him a look that says, "Try again, and you'll be using this oil to soothe your own bruises." Welcome to ancient Syria's version of quality control. It's more intense than you expected. You watch another inspector use a thin bronze probe to dip into a jar, bringing the tip to a small flame. The oil burns, clean, steady, blue-tinged. He nods. "Cooking grade. Good press." He marks the seal with a tiny slash. That's it. A flick of approval that could mean profit or ruin. You glance around. There's a table dedicated just to seals. Little lumps of clay or wax, each bearing the imprint of someone's name or title or a symbol of authority. A tiny lion, a coiled snake, a pair of crossed palms. You ask the man behind the table how many seals he sees per day. He doesn't look up. "Hundreds, some real, some fake, all exhausting." He hands you one to examine. It's small, no bigger than a coin, with a pressed sunburst pattern. "Temple scribe's seal," he explains. "Rare, highly taxed, only used on verified purity oil." He lowers his voice. "That's why people try to forge it." You blink. "And what happens if they do?" He shrugs. "Depends. Sometimes they get fined. Sometimes they vanish." There's a pause. You set the seal down gently. A trader bursts in, panting. "I have a sealed batch. Good oil, certified." He lifts the lid off a large amphora. Everyone in the tent freezes. The scent is rich, deep, fresh pressed. You can almost see the glow in the inspector's eyes. He moves forward, breaks the wax seal with a small chisel, and leans in. One sniff. Two. Then a third, longer inhale. He straightens, frowns. Something's off. You're about to lean in when he dips a cloth into the oil and presses it to a clean pottery shard. He lights it. The flame flickers strangely, high and smoky. He turns to the trader. "Cut with sesame oil." The trader protests. "Only a little." The inspector snaps. "This was marked for offering. It must be pure." A crowd gathers. There's tension in the air, like someone's about to lose their trade license, or worse. You back up slowly as two temple officials arrive, their robes billowing dramatically, and haul the poor man away. One of them gives you a glance that says, "We remember faces." You continue wandering through the inspection area and notice a curious sight. A cluster of half-filled jars, all with matching marks, but clearly different oils. A senior inspector calls it a reconciliation batch, when multiple small shipments are combined into a single one, but only if their origins, quality, and labels align. It's a delicate process. One wrong mix, and the whole thing is downgraded. Some jars are marked with counter seals, little additions that indicate someone else has verified the oil after the initial sealing. Like an ancient audit trail. You spot one amphora with 3 different seals, each from a different city. That oil has traveled, and somehow it passed every checkpoint. Not everyone is so lucky. You hear hushed voices nearby. A pair of junior traders argue in low tones over whether to borrow a seal from a neighboring stall. No one checks the bottom of the jar, one says. We can flip the markings. It's not a great plan, but it happens. Fringe researchers have proposed that certain inspection sites developed unofficial stamp markets, places where desperate merchants could pay a few coins for a second-hand seal impression, pressed gently into fresh clay and aged using smoke and damp cloth. Whether that's real or a dramatic exaggeration? Well, historians still argue whether these stamp rings were wide networks or just isolated acts of survival by struggling traders. You take a seat on a low bench as a boy, no more than 10, runs oil samples between tents. His little pouch clinks with mini ampules, each labeled with tight, scratchy script. He sets them down for a panel of experts. The sniff team. Yes, that's what they're called. These guys are trained to detect spoilage, smokability, and even regional flavor just from scent. One man sniffs a vial and announces, "Pressed too early. The grove rushed the harvest." Another shakes his head. "This has goat residue. Someone didn't clean their press." The boy collects the notes, ties them to the sample jar, and vanishes into the midday crowd. You stretch your legs, glance around, and realize this whole operation, from field to seal, exists on a razor's edge. One missed detail, one rushed job, one false mark, and your entire shipment becomes just another broken jar in the confiscation pile. You make your way toward the exit. A scribe waves at you, chuckling. "We're not paranoid," he says. "We're realistic. Trust isn't free. You have to earn it, every scratch at a time." You look down at your own hand, dusty now, a faint oil stain near your thumb. You imagine it there forever, like a ghost print from someone else's jar, someone else's label, trying to remind you of a world where everything had to be verified, even trust itself. The scent of oil and clay still clings to your clothes as you follow a narrow stone path away from the inspection tent. It winds through a maze of shuttered stalls and sleeping dogs into a quieter quarter of town, one known for its scribes, stamp makers, and symbol carvers. If the trade checkpoints were the beating heart of control, this neighborhood is the nervous system. You pause outside a humble shop where wind chimes made from broken amphora necks rattle in the breeze. A wooden sign above the door reads, in 3 languages, "Seals made, seals fixed, secrets kept." You duck inside. The air smells of wax, damp stone, and something smoky, like old incense, or maybe burnt sesame. The man inside is ancient, the kind of old that makes you wonder if he once invented olive oil. He doesn't look up as you enter, just keeps carving into a small lump of hardened clay with an obsidian blade, his hands moving with the kind of precision that can only come from decades of avoiding catastrophic mistakes. You wander through the shelves, which are lined with hundreds of tiny seals. Some round, others square. Some with elaborate crests. others with simple dots or slashes. You recognize a few: a lion, a palm, a crescent moon, but most are abstract: a jagged S, a series of vertical dots, a fish with 3 eyes. The old man finally speaks. "You can fake a seal," he says, "but you can't fake its story." You blink. What does that mean? He holds up the one he's carving, a small disc with a swirling flame at its center. Every seal is tied to a name, a region, a promise. He sets it down. If you use the wrong one, someone notices. And he's right. Ancient Syrian seals weren't just logos. They were legal devices. A jar stamped with the wrong seal might not only be rejected, it might spark a lawsuit, or worse, divine punishment. You hear about one scribe whose misused temple seal led to a 3-month citywide oil fast. People were not thrilled. You kneel beside a shelf labeled "Ghost Seals." Curious, you pick one up. It's faint, so faint the carving is nearly gone. "What's this?" you ask. The old man peers over. A lost mark. The family it belonged to disappeared in a flood 2 generations ago. No one left to use it. He shrugs. "But I keep it, just in case the wind changes." Some seals bear dual marks: the main family crest, plus a tiny secondary symbol: a bird, a thorn, a splash. These were called trust marks, used when a merchant vouched for another's shipment. It's like co-signing a loan, except the consequences involve potentially being exiled because someone diluted oil with sheep tallow. "Ever made a fake?" you ask, trying to sound casual. The man gives you a look that could boil soup. "I make marks. What people do with them, that's their business." Fair enough. He leads you to a back table, where a wax tablet rests beside a shallow tray of drying clay seals. You notice something odd. A row of 5 seals, nearly identical, except the smallest detail. One has the flame curling left instead of right. Another has 4 lines in the tail swirl, not 3. "These are decoys," he says. "We send them with high-risk shipments. If a thief tampers with the jar, he picks the wrong seal. Then we know." He grins, a little proudly. "Thieves are lazy. They copy, not compare." You glance at the back wall, where a massive board holds impressions of known seal forgeries. Some are laughably bad, blurry, misshapen, upside down. Others are almost perfect. A tiny note beneath one reads, "Caught at Mari checkpoint. Forged using pig bone. Traitor vanished." The man taps the board. History's told in lies, too, sometimes more clearly than in truth. That idea sits with you as you head next door, where another artisan is at work carving symbols directly onto finished amphorae. This guy's younger, fast hands, cheeky smile, faint smell of glue. "I do contract symbols," he says. "You want 10 jars labeled for temple use? I can make 'em match." He holds up a stylus carved with a 3-pronged star. "This one's in style. Seen a lot of demand." You ask about mistakes. "Oh, sure," he laughs. "One time I carved a royal shipment with the symbol for goat fat instead of temple oil. Whole caravan got turned back at the capital. My client nearly throttled me. He grins. Got the spelling right after that. You realize now how fragile the whole system is. A civilization leaning on markings no larger than a thumbnail. One wrong seal, one scratch out of place, and an entire shipment collapses into chaos. And yet, it works. Mostly. Historians still argue whether these symbol systems were taught formally, if there were schools of seals, or if it was more like modern graffiti crews. Learn by doing, or by copying someone better than you. Some evidence points to traveling seal makers, hired like seasonal workers. Others suggest families guarded their symbol knowledge like recipes. You step outside into the cooling dusk and find a boy running past you with a basket of freshly carved seals. He's singing something under his breath, just a tune, no words. But you catch a line as he disappears around the corner. One scratch wrong, and the temple goes dark. You smile. Even kids know. You pass a fountain where a trader is carefully cleaning the base of an amphora, trying not to scrub off its faint, precious markings. His assistant dries it, then presses a wax seal to the rim. They step back like it's sacred. And honestly, it kind of is. That little pressed disc means the jar is finally ready. It can speak for itself now. And as you walk away, past chattering artisans and dusty shelves of carved clay, you realize, in ancient Syria, words didn't always live in scrolls. Sometimes they lived in symbols. Tiny, deliberate, easy to miss, but powerful enough to light a temple or bring a kingdom to its knees. By the time you return to the main road, the city has shifted. The light softens. The air cools. Shadows stretch across the walls of homes made from sun-baked brick. You pass oil lamps flickering to life on low windowsills, their glow soft and golden, each one fueled by someone's carefully labeled, meticulously inspected, bureaucratically verified olive oil. And suddenly, it hits you. You're seeing the end of the journey. Not the trade, not the sealing, not the inspections, but the use. The destination of every stamped, scratched, sealed amphora is here, everyday life. And it's not glamorous. There's no dramatic orchestra swelling as a woman tips a bit of oil into a clay pan. No epic narration when a priest anoints a newborn with 2 fingers of third press Grove grade from the Highlands. These moments are quiet, intimate, and, in a strange way, more important than all the shouting at border checkpoints combined. You stop at a public oven where a cluster of women are baking flatbreads. One drizzles oil onto hot stone before laying down the dough. It sizzles, pops, and instantly fills the air with a savory, almost sweet scent. You ask where the oil came from. She shrugs. My cousin's cousin trades in the northern markets. He says it's press pure, 2 summers old. She says it like a wine vintage. Another woman nearby pipes up. Mine's from a temple ration, marked for the sick. I use it for my knees. She rubs a bit on the back of her leg, and you swear the scent alone makes your joints feel better. Olive oil wasn't just food. It was medicine, too. Used for wounds, sunburns, hair care, even spiritual cleansing. A jar labeled for healing wasn't decorative. It was instruction. And heaven help the person who confused that with a batch intended for lamps. People didn't want to smell like soot when they were trying to soothe their arthritis. You wander into a humble home, low ceiling, woven mats, oil lamp flickering from a niche in the wall. A man's kneeling before a tiny altar, carefully pouring oil over a smooth stone idol. The scent is strong, lavender mixed into the olive base, likely a local addition. His wife notices you watching and explains, "We mark our jars with this symbol." She traces a spiral with her finger. "It's our family sign. My grandmother carved it." And here's where things get unexpectedly personal. Private labels. Not all markings were official. Some were just theirs. Symbols passed down within families. Unique, recognizable, often carved with clumsy hands and even clumsier tools. A crooked X, a wonky star, a stick figure that looks like a frog. They weren't meant for trade. They were meant for memory. You sit outside and watch a teenage boy refill small jars from a larger amphora. His father calls out, "Use the marked ones for guests." And sure enough, the boy picks jars with painted symbols, crude drawings of grapes and sunbursts. "Fancy oil," he says, grinning. "We only use it on feast days." It's easy to forget that labeling wasn't always about inspection or law. Sometimes it was just pride. A way to say, "This came from our grove, our press. We made this. Remember it." A way to leave a fingerprint on something that might otherwise disappear. You pass a street healer treating a scrape on a child's arm. She dips a reed into a small jar labeled with red wax and a single line carved down the side. "Temple oil," she mutters. "Blessed by the priest. Don't waste it." She dabs it on carefully, then blows on the wound. The child stops crying. Further down, a potter is selling empty amphorae, clean, wide-shouldered, unmarked. "Make your own," he calls. "Paint your mark, carve your prayer." He even offers styluses for sale, cheap, quick personal branding tools for households. Historians still argue whether this private labeling system was legally recognized or just an informal tradition. Some think families kept their own oil ledgers. Others think they simply remembered by shape, size, smell. But pottery shards with weird, inconsistent marks, sometimes hearts, sometimes footprints, suggest that at least someone took the time to say, "This one's mine." You end up at a tiny bathhouse, the kind that barely fits two people. Inside, a middle-aged woman massages oil into her arms before scrubbing with a curved bronze blade. "It pulls dirt out," she says. "No soap, just scrape." She holds up the jar. It's marked with a fish symbol. Fish means skin-friendly. You don't want to get the eye one. That's for lamps. You sit beside the doorway and just watch for a while. It's soothing. The rhythm of cleaning, pouring, rubbing, rinsing. It's so easy to forget that these amphorae, with their political seals and inspection stamps, end up here. In a bath, in a kitchen, at a shrine, in someone's hands. And maybe that's the most beautiful part. Because no matter how many layers of regulation or trade routes or imperial stamps a jar passes through, it always returns to something human. Someone marking it with love. Someone remembering whose grove it came from. someone using it in a moment that matters. You catch sight of a child handing her mother a tiny jar with a clay sun seal. "I used the right one," she beams. The mother nods, not even checking, because in that house, the symbol means something. And sometimes, that's all you need. You wake before dawn. Maybe it's the crows outside. Maybe it's the lingering scent of oil in your clothes. Either way, you rise with the city. There's a different hum now. Quieter, slower. As you pass the marketplace, you spot merchants prepping their stalls, sweeping dust, arranging jars with deliberate care. The world hasn't turned noisy yet, but it's already alive. And you? You're heading uphill, because today you're visiting the temple storehouses. It sounds lofty, maybe even glamorous, but don't get ahead of yourself. These aren't gilded palaces of gold and incense. These are warehouses. Stone, silent, very organized. You arrive at one just as a donkey cart pulls in, creaking under the weight of a dozen sealed amphorae. The driver hops down and starts unloading, each jar marked with thick, dark brush strokes, symbols for first press, offering grade, verified by steward. At the entrance, a temple scribe waits, stylus in hand, squinting through the early light. He doesn't say much, just scratches notes onto a clay tablet as each jar is rolled past. Occasionally, he pauses, sniffs a jar's opening, taps a seal. "Wrong press symbol," he mutters to one of the workers. "Temple batch can't have a crescent and star. That's for the military." The worker flinches. You're not sure what happens to mislabeled temple oil, but from the look on his face, you don't want to know. Inside, the storehouse is cool and dim. Rows of amphorae rest on wooden racks or stacked against walls, sorted by region, purpose, and ritual level. A junior priest walks by carrying a scroll longer than your arm, an inventory that maps every jar in the building. You notice something fascinating. The labels are evolving. Yes, the classic scratch marks and stamped seals are still there, but some jars now feature painted symbols, more decorative, more intuitive. One has a gold line running around the neck, marked with dots to indicate volume. Another bears a stylized flame, indicating it's to be used for the nightly altar lighting. "That one," says the priest, "is only touched after moonrise. It's been blessed." Temple-grade oil wasn't just high quality. It was sacred. The labeling had to reflect that. And you're told some of the markings were meant not just for humans, but for the gods themselves, symbols visible during ritual, glowing in firelight, swirling with incense smoke. You're led deeper to a smaller, locked chamber. Inside are the priest's jars, smaller batches, tightly sealed, each labeled with an intricate private symbol known only to a few. "These are ceremonial use only," the priest explains. "We don't mark them for trade. We mark them for truth." That last word hangs in the air. You reach out to one jar with a triangle inside a circle inside another triangle. "What's that mean?" you whisper. He smiles faintly. "Even we don't know anymore. But we still use it. Always for weddings." Historians still argue whether temple storehouses operated independently from regional trade hubs or if they were just glorified redistribution centers. Some evidence suggests temples developed their own marking systems, separate from merchants or royal offices, almost like sacred encryption. Others believe it was just layers of redundancy, because even the gods didn't want rancid oil during a full moon. As you move through the storerooms, you notice something else. The jars are aging. Some of them are years old, their markings faded, their wax seals cracked. "We keep them," the assistant says, "sometimes for emergencies, sometimes just to remember." He shows you a particularly ancient amphora, its symbol barely visible under a crust of dust. This one was pressed during a drought, used during the eclipse rites. We don't use it now, but it stays. You begin to realize that temple oil was part commodity, part time capsule. The labels weren't just functional, they were historical. Markers of season, weather, war. A jar stamped with a double crescent might recall the year of dual floods. A spiral cut into the clay might signal a funeral year for the king. "These are our memory," the priest says, running a hand over a lined amphora. "We don't write everything in scrolls." At a side table, a scribe is carefully relabeling older jars, preserving their original marks, but adding a small slip of clay with a new symbol, a flame enclosed in a box. "This means archived," he explains. "Not for use, not for trade, just for keeping." You begin to feel something unexpected, a kind of reverence for these dusty containers. Not because they held anything holy, but because of how seriously they were treated. No jar was just a jar. No mark was just a doodle. Everything meant something, even if no one remembered exactly what. You exit through the rear of the storehouse and find a small garden, quiet, fragrant with rosemary. There, a novice priest is lighting a single oil lamp on a stone pedestal. He tips the amphora with practiced care, stopping just as the liquid kisses the rim. The lamp flares. The sun rises. The symbol on the amphora? A spiral. Faint. Simple. Beautiful. And you realize that at the end of all this, the inspections, the fraud, the bureaucracy, the ceremonies, it still comes down to one thing: a flame, a label, a purpose. You leave the temple grounds just as the sun climbs fully above the rooftops. The streets are warming up now. Merchants shouting again, donkeys braying, pots clinking. You head toward the edge of town, past the markets and the bakeries and the yelling tax clerks, to the one place that pulls all these threads together: the olive press. It's not glamorous. It's a dusty compound on the outskirts, flanked by tall walls streaked with years of oil splatter. You slip through the arched doorway into a wide courtyard where men are already hard at work. You're hit with a thick, earthy smell, the scent of crushed fruit, wet stone, sweat, and history. This is where it all begins. A man in a wool tunic waves you over. "You ever seen an old press run?" he asks, already walking. "Keep your hands out of the ropes. We don't stop it for fingers." The press is beautiful in its own brutal way. A giant wooden beam, heavy stone weights, and a trough layered with woven mats soaked in olive pulp. Workers shovel olives, just harvested, into the pressing baskets, stacking them in a tower that slowly buckles under the weight. Then the beam is lowered, squeezing liquid from the pulp, the oil seeping out like golden sap. You watch, mesmerized. The oil flows into a catch basin lined with smooth clay, where it settles, clear yellow rising above cloudy water and plant debris. That's the first press, the man says. Best stuff. Goes to temples or rich families. He points at a nearby shelf stacked with short, wide jars. See those? Already labeled. Triangle for temple, dot for kitchen, line and curve for export. You begin to understand how early the labeling process starts. Not after transport, not at inspection, but right here at the press itself. The jars are marked while the oil is still warm, still alive. A teenage boy nearby scratches a quick symbol onto a damp amphora shoulder with a sharpened reed. Mark it before it cools, he mutters, or it'll smear. And here's something unexpected. Labeling isn't entirely standardized here. Different presses in different towns use slightly different symbols for the same thing. One man's double curve might be another's half fish. This explains why traders and inspectors down the line need cross-reference tablets, why arguments erupt over what really constitutes a Highland Grove mark, why scribes always seem vaguely annoyed. Historians still argue whether this was a flaw in the system or a feature. Was it sloppiness or flexibility? Some believe regional variation allowed for greater local control, a kind of built-in protectionism. Others think it caused chaos and fraud, and probably made temple accountants cry into their ledgers. You kneel beside a row of sealed amphorae resting in the shade, each labeled differently depending on the oil's grade and purpose. One has a bold X slashed across it. You ask why. That's press residue, the boy says. Bottom of the batch. Only good for lamps in barns. Another has a jagged loop that looks like a snake eating itself. That's sun-fermented, someone whispers. Used for funerals. Smells bad. A woman enters the courtyard carrying a new batch of amphorae, her cart creaking beneath the weight. She's from a neighboring town, and her jars bear unfamiliar marks. The press manager frowns. "We don't use birds for lamp oil," he says sharply. She shrugs. "We do where I'm from." He rolls his eyes and motions for a scribe to make a note. There will be a discussion later, possibly a heated one. That's the thing about labeling. It's political. It reflects geography, tradition, even family pride. And sometimes that leads to friction. Like the time, one worker tells you with a snort, that a shipment of sacred use oil from the south was rejected because it had a barley sheaf symbol, which the temple considered too agricultural. They called it vulgar, he says, laughing. It was better oil than anything we had. You walk to the back of the courtyard where a row of half-finished jars wait to be sealed. A woman sits with a bowl of warm wax and a tray of seal stamps. She moves quickly, dipping, pressing, cooling. Each jar gets its assigned mark. She hums softly as she works, then glances up. "You want to try?" You kneel beside her and take the smallest jar in the row. She hands you a round stamp with a trident-shaped imprint. "For coastal use," she explains. "Fish markets. Smells don't matter." You press it gently into the wax. It feels delicate, powerful, permanent. Not bad, she says. If it turns out bad, they'll just blame me anyway. You sit and watch her finish the rest, and it starts to feel ritualistic. Like this is more than production, more than economy. It's craft, even art. And then a man bursts into the courtyard waving a broken seal fragment. "Who used this?" he shouts. "This is a northern mark. We're in the south." Everyone freezes. The courtyard goes still. All eyes turn to one of the young boys near the stamping table. He looks terrified. The press manager approaches slowly. "Did you use a northern stamp?" The boy nods. "Why?" He hesitates, then says, "It looked prettier." The manager stares at him, then sighs. "You just labeled a second-grade batch as temple oil from Mount Yasher. That's very illegal." And just like that, an entire shipment is pulled aside. The wax scraped off, the seals redone, time lost, money lost. All because someone thought a symbol looked cool. You leave the press compound as the sun climbs higher, your hands still faintly sticky from wax and oil. You glance back at the rows of jars, marked and ready, awaiting their journey through the system. They'll be sniffed, weighed, poured, burned, revered, and maybe, just maybe, end up lighting someone's shrine or curing someone's rash. It all started here, with stone, rope, and the gentle curve of a stylus. You're back on the road again, this time trailing a modest olive oil caravan winding its way toward the river docks. The city stretches behind you, its temples, markets, and bureaucratic tangles fading into the heat shimmer. Before you lies something much older, much more persistent, the logistics of distance. And boy, do jars hate distance. You've probably never thought of amphorae as delicate creatures, but try carting 30 of them down a rutted track behind a donkey with commitment issues. Every bump is a potential disaster. That's why each jar in this caravan is not only sealed, but double-checked, strapped, and cushioned with straw, and many bear secondary symbols painted on after packing. A diagonal slash means top load only. A red crescent means do not stack. One particularly squat amphora has a cartoonish chicken drawn on it. You ask, naturally. "That's just for luck," the handler grins. "Works better than prayers." You arrive at the docks just as a flat-bottomed boat is being loaded. This isn't some royal fleet. This is trade in its rawest form. Wooden planks, frayed ropes, wet feet, and at the center of it all, a checklist. The dock scribe stands beside a battered clay tablet and begins calling out names, symbols, and weights. 2 jars, lion seal, for temple storage. Check. 3 jars, snake stamp, Northern Grove. Check. 1 jar, unidentified mark, pause. He squints. The jar is set aside. The merchant protests. "That mark's just faded." The scribe shrugs. "Could be. Could also be fraud." The jar is given the ancient Syrian equivalent of time out. It goes on the to verify pile. No mark, no ride. That's the rule. Because by now you understand, the label is the passport. Without it, a jar isn't olive oil. It's just a liability. You could claim it's the finest press from the holiest grove, but if the mark doesn't speak for it, no one will listen. You follow a young handler as he finishes stacking the sealed jars in a tight, belly-low corner of the boat. He's careful to align the seal sides outward. Why? So we can check them mid-journey, he explains. If one goes missing, or a mark gets scratched, we know immediately. Sure enough, he's got a little wax tablet with a sketched layout of the hold, jar position, seal type, destination symbol. It's like a Tetris board, but with more anxiety. The boat rocks gently as more goods arrive. Wine, grain, bundles of reeds, and still the scribes hover, checking marks, muttering, arguing. One insists a triple dot symbol means royal press. Another says it's just a family sign from the South Hills. Voices rise. A dock elder finally settles it. If it ain't on the list, it don't get on the boat. And that's that. You linger near a quiet trader rubbing dirt over a freshly sealed amphora. "What are you doing?" you ask. He glances around, whispers, "It's a trick. Makes it look older. Aged oil travels better." Then he winks. "Don't worry. I use the right mark." Historians still argue whether this kind of age forging was common or just the work of clever outliers. Some suggest there were entire docks in cities like Ugarit that specialized in weathering jars for prestige, rubbing them with salt, heat, even charcoal smoke to mimic seasonal wear. Others think that's just archaeologists getting carried away with soot patterns. You'll have to decide for yourself. As the final ropes are secured and the crew prepares to shove off, the captain steps aboard with one last responsibility: a journey seal. It's a simple thing, a small disc of wax pressed onto the lead cargo jar, marked with the captain's own symbol. In this case, a wide handprint with a single star at the palm. "Means I vouch for the whole shipment," he says. "If anything goes missing, my name's on the line." It's a beautiful gesture of accountability, also terrifying. The boat pushes off, creaking into the current, seals flashing in the sun. You watch it go, feeling oddly proud, and a little nervous for that one unlucky jar in the verify pile. As the dock clears out, a port official brings out a broken amphora, discovered at the bottom of a cargo stack. It's shattered clean through, its contents wasted, the seal split in half. He sighs. "No mark, no way to trace it. We can't charge anyone." He tosses the fragments into a bin marked loss. And here's the lesson, clear as day. Labels don't just record trust, they assign it. Without a name, a symbol, a mark, there's no accountability, no apology, no justice. Just another jar, shattered and silent. You pass a small stone monument near the edge of the dock, a column etched with dozens of tiny symbols. Merchant marks, seals of long-dead groves. At the base, a faint inscription: "Let the oil bear our name." You run your fingers over one of the carvings. A spiral, worn nearly flat. Maybe someone's best press once sailed from here, marked with care, sealed with pride, and sent into the world to light a home or heal a wound. You leave the docks behind, following a narrow trail that winds inland, away from the river. The sun is high now, but the olive groves offer shade. dense, twisted trees whose gnarled trunks seem old enough to remember the very first amphorae ever carved. Their silvery leaves shimmer in the wind like scales on ancient fish. This is the origin, the true beginning, the grove. You pass a man perched on a low branch, inspecting the ripeness of an olive between his fingers. "Still a few days," he murmurs. You want the fruit oily, but not soft. If you press too early, the taste is bitter. Too late, it's just mush. The ground beneath him is scattered with nets, ready for the harvest. Some are woven with dyed threads, reds and yellows to mark boundaries between family plots. Even the soil gets labeled here in its own way. You're welcomed by a small family group harvesting early batches for personal use. They use hooked sticks to gently knock fruit from the branches into wide baskets, careful not to bruise them. You offer to help, and they chuckle, handing you a stick. "Easy," one says, "but aim well. The oil remembers." That phrase lodges in your brain. You take a closer look at their baskets. Each is marked with a little tag, some carved, some painted. "X for my brother," a girl says. "Circle for my uncle. He's picky." They're not shipping this oil across the kingdom. They're not even selling it. But they still mark it. Because they want to remember. Because they want to say something about where it came from and who touched it. As the sun slides lower, you follow them to a rustic press built right into the hill. Not the grand, city-style beam press, but a humble lever system using rocks and muscle. The oil trickles into a cracked bowl. No wax seals here, just carved symbols on the bowl's rim, passed down from mother to daughter. You ask the grandmother about hers. It's a lopsided spiral, almost cartoonish. "That's my wedding symbol." She smiles. "I started pressing oil the day I got married. My husband said if it tasted better than his mother's, he'd never question me again." "And did it?" She winks. "He never asked twice." Later, around a fire, you sit with the family as they pour the first golden drops into shallow dishes for tasting. The oil shimmers in the light, catching hints of green and gold. Bread is torn, dipped, passed around. It's soft, peppery, alive. "This one's for us," the father says. "Not for gods, not for markets, just for the table." You nod. It tastes like care. But even here, at the most personal level, labels remain. The daughter brings out a handful of small clay stoppers. Each is scratched with a tiny mark, a squiggle, a leaf, a triangle. "I use these for the jars I give away," she explains. "So people know it's from me." You admire one, a delicate fish etched into the base. "Why a fish?" She shrugs. "I like fish." That's all. No economic system, no temple approval, just a personal symbol that means something. And when the receiver opens that jar days or weeks from now, they'll see that fish and think of her. That's the real magic. Historians still argue whether this level of informal labeling had any impact on trade data. Some think the vast network of unrecorded personal exchange was even more robust than the official market. Others believe it was a small sentimental footnote in a much larger machine. You suspect it's both. As the stars begin to appear, you help carry a small batch of filled jars to a shed near the grove. Each is laid carefully on straw, marked with a family stamp, a crescent enclosed in a square. The grandmother says the stamp is based on an eclipse she saw as a child. Back then, we didn't have much, she says, running her hand over the cool clay. But my mother told me, if you press oil with love and you mark it with truth, people will taste it. You believe her. Before you go, they gift you a small jar of their oil, sealed with that same crescent square mark. For your journey, the girl says. So you remember we're real. You carry it with both hands as you walk back through the groves. The night wind rustles the branches above. Somewhere far away, a jackal cries. And still you walk, jar tucked safely against your chest, warmed by the fire in your belly and the mark on the clay. You realize that, after all this, the ancient Syrians weren't just obsessed with labeling out of paranoia or politics. They were preserving memory, securing promises, binding identity to substance. A sealed jar wasn't just a container, it was a message, a whisper that said, "This is from here, made by us, and we want you to know it." You stop under an old olive tree and sit beneath its twisting roots. You uncork the jar and dip your finger in. The oil gleams under the stars. You press your thumb to the side of the amphora, leaving the faintest smudge of oil. A mark. Your mark. And in that quiet moment, it feels just as official as any royal seal. You lie back beneath that ancient olive tree, the warmth of the earth rising through your spine, the smell of the oil still faint on your fingers. The night air is gentle now, cool but not cold, brushing over your cheeks like the soft whisper of linen sheets. Crickets chirp at a slow, thoughtful pace, and a distant owl calls just once, like a closing bell for the day. The jar rests beside you, sealed again, its mark catching the starlight, barely. Quiet, content. You feel the stillness of everything. The groves, the distant hills, the river now far behind you. You think of the journey that oil has taken. Not just the physical miles, but the generations. The careful hands that picked it. The laughter of the girl who scratched a fish into its lid. The priest who dared not spill a drop. The trader who swore his cousin's cousin pressed it under a blood moon. The seal maker who warned, "You can fake a mark, but not its story." And now, it's here, with you. The world slows further. The earth breathes beneath you. You feel smaller in the best way, like a single amphora nestled gently in the great storeroom of time. Labeled, remembered. So close your eyes. Let the past soften. Let your thoughts uncurl like olive branches under moonlight. There's nothing left to mark. No more seals to press. No ledgers to balance. Only stillness. You are safe here. You are sealed. You are known.